Hi, my name is Jackson Weiser, and this is Gentrification, the hidden harm behind that beautiful new neighborhood. In the 90s, the United States government rolled out the largest welfare overhaul in the nation's history and dropped from a peak of 5.1 million cases and 14.4 million recipients in March 1994 to 2 million cases, 5 million recipients, by June of 2003. In theory, this is exactly the result welfare policy should create. But this was achieved not by lifting people out of poverty, but shifting the goalposts to make less people eligible for the support welfare provides. The government decreased the number of people on welfare, not by decreasing the amount of poverty, but decreasing the availability of welfare. Economic development all over the nation is similarly misrepresented through the practice of gentrification in inner cities. Neither solve the problem they aim to ameliorate, but rather open the wound further, hurting instead of helping. The term gentrification was coined originally by Ruth Glass in 1964. She defined it as a phenomenon when many of the working class quarters are invaded by middle class, upper and lower. In the 70s, cities in the U.S. created tax incentives to get large businesses to renovate old buildings in underdeveloped areas, displacing lower-income people through industrial and commercial means. In 2002, Richard Florida published The Rise of the Creative Class, marked the beginning of the modern definition of gentrification. The book purports the notion that distressed inner cities can be revived by an influx of cafe-going creative professionals. In 2025, gentrification is vastly defined by the influx of young professionals and the outflux of the original lower-income residents. The process of gentrification is essentially an attempt to revitalize an area through a residential and commercial reset. Gentrification results in neighborhood revitalization, increased property values, economic growth, enhanced infrastructure, reduced crime rates, diverse dining and entertainment, environmental improvements, preservation of historic architecture, increased community pride, social mix and interaction, attraction of talent and creativity, better education, improved public transport, more access to healthcare, positive perception and image, and increased property tax revenue. However, these pros can all be attributed, one way or another, to the relocation of the problem as opposed to the treatment of the problem. When neighborhoods are torn down and replaced with brand new homes or shopping centers, of course property values will increase and economic growth will occur. When people struggling to make ends meet are forced to leave, of course crime will go down. Additionally, some cite decreases to poverty exposure as another positive of gentrification. However, poverty exposure decreases for the same reason everything else goes down. The people in poverty are no longer capable of living in the area, so they have to move elsewhere. This so-called revitalization of gentrified areas is illusory, when the cause isn't economic growth, but economic reset. As of October 2025, Los Angeles home prices were down 2.2% compared to last year, selling for a median price of $1 million. LA is becoming a city of millionaires, not because the city is experiencing earth-shattering career growth, but because it is pricing out anyone who isn't in the top 10%. Gina Fields, the current chair of the Empowerment Congress West Neighborhood Development Council, is convinced that her LA neighborhood, known as The Jungle, is going to be taken from the long-standing historically black residents. In 2021, Baldwin Hills, the official name of Fields' neighborhood, was bought by a corporate developer with plans to revitalize it into a mall, new condos, apartments, stores, offices, and restaurants, all at a cost of about $1 billion. In 2021, the housing crisis in California was so bad that predictions were made stating the only way out is to build at least 180,000 new homes and apartments per year, and maybe as many as 500,000 per year by 2025. Despite the clear potential that gentrification has to perpetuate homelessness in urban areas, not many studies have been performed to determine causality. In 2024, Claremont McKenna College student Hannah Huning Dung set out to investigate how gentrification impacts homelessness rates through the mechanisms of median housing values and educational attainment in Los Angeles County. The data measured included median income, housing values, education level, and population totals provided by the U.S. Census and the LA County EGIS program. Specifically in areas labeled as gentrifiable, Dung's research showed that for every 1% increase in bachelor's degree attainment, the homeless rates per 10,000 people is predicted to rise by 2.567, indicating an association between homeless rates and education. In areas not labeled as gentrifiable, rising median housing value and bachelor's degree attainment is associated with declining rates of homelessness, reinforcing the data found in gentrifiable areas as more likely to be causal. The research was the first of its kind, spanning several years and striving to prove the link between gentrification of an area and increases in homelessness. With the confirmation of her hypothesis, Dung proposed policy-based solutions to the homelessness crisis, gentrification creates, including increasing homelessness prevention interventions, such as job training programs and support services in gentrifying areas. Her research serves to empirically demonstrate the link between gentrification and factors associated with the influx of young professionals. This scientific evidence, though, doesn't show the structural causes of gentrification. The process of gentrification begins with the corporate acquisition of property in an economically struggling urban area. Then, it is converted into housing complexes or businesses, driving young professionals to the area with low prices and career opportunities matching their educational experience. As the average education continues to rise, so do the career standards. People who barely live there are no longer competitive applicants for the jobs nearby and are forced to the bottom of the labor market. As their incomes become stagnant or decrease, the prices of goods and services continue to rise in coordination with the rising average income. Renters are forced, or incentivized, to kick out tenants who are not paying their bills on time or to sell their buildings to developers. Locals either go homeless in an effort to maintain their ties to the land, or they move elsewhere. The displacement of people due to gentrification comes in two forms: direct and indirect. Direct displacement is characterized by voluntary moves such as evictions, increased rent, and deliberate neglect of dwelling upkeep by a landlord, all of which threaten a resident's ability to stay put. Indirect displacement is characterized by housing demand that inflates costs to the point of unattainability for existing residents or changes to the feel, taste, norms, and desires of an existing neighborhood. Versi and her research team inquired into what displacement meant for the existing residents in Harlem, New York, and overwhelmingly found that longtime residents reported homeless shelter populations ballooning even larger than they were before. More people than ever are homeless, and we're talking working people, not people doing drugs on the street. Hardworking, honest Americans are forced to move out of their homes and scrounge for what they can. Even with all their grit, they're still unable to dig themselves out of the hole that gentrification creates. Additionally, Versi's interviewees felt out of place with the new shops and stores aimed at a newer, wealthier consumer, beginning the isolation and destruction of existing cultures. By displacing the people originally there, cultures are dismantled and silenced, and it is not just in Harlem. In South LA, the longtime black residents are being priced out, resulting in the deconstruction of the neighborhood from its historically black roots. It stood as a center of black wealth in a state where there has long been a gap between black and white Californians, and is now in jeopardy. Black culture is already at risk in the United States, but gentrification pushes it further down and reinforces the systemic barriers between African Americans and economic success. In place of existing cultures, consumerist cultures are pushed onto the locals, forcing them to conform to the newer, more expensive culture or become not only economically, but stylistically obsolete. The economic and cultural coercion makes gentrification not only discouraged, but morally impermissible. Ethicists don't agree on much, but the principles of gentrification generally contrast with the objectives of most ethical arguments. Utilitarians argue from a consequential point of view. The outcome is justified if the good outweighs the suffering. In instances of gentrification, the economic undercutting and forced relocation of a people is not comparable to the economic success of an area. Kantian contractualists argue from the perspective of individual comparison of burden. Gentrification is again demonstrated to be impermissible, as according to this approach, it can be argued that the greatest burden of gentrification on a displaced person is significantly worse than the greatest burden on a person who is simply not permitted to profit from the new economy of the area. Rawlsians argue that every person is entitled to the maximum amount of liberty that doesn't inhibit others having an equal amount of liberty. The process of gentrification demonstrates an imbalance in which people of lower incomes have less liberties, like staying in their homes, than those with more money. Nozikians believe that all acquisitions must come about through just means. The economic leverage that outsiders exercise with lower-income locals is arguably an unjust method of acquisition of property. The number of ethical arguments against gentrification is innumerable, but one constant remains clear. The principles of the process are unjust. If gentrification cannot be avoided, the people it negatively affects must be assisted in an efficient and dignified manner. LA is doing a good job considering how extreme the issues are there. LA has permitted more than 136,000 housing units since 2014 and created the most successful transit-based affordable housing incentive program in the country. However, LA, along with many other cities, is struggling to keep up with developers and young home seekers. Even with the development of affordable housing in LA, thousands continue to occupy Skid Row. To really solve the housing crisis in urban locations, gentrification needs to be prevented rather than treated. Corporations need to be disincentivized from establishing large complexes in currently struggling areas to prevent them from taking advantage of struggling people. The minimum wage must be raised to allow for those prone to gentrification to be able to revitalize their communities without the help of outsiders. Even if these implementations prevent the immediate economic growth that comes with corporatization and immigration, they encourage the natives of the area to cultivate the economy themselves. This would promote economic stimulation of residents and businesses while preserving the culture, identity, and residential makeup of the area. Gentrification is a silent killer. Neighborhoods all over the world are changed from ghettos to gallerias every day, and it's celebrated as economic development and growth, finally revitalizing a dying part of the city. Most people only have this positive, surface-level view of gentrification and its effects, but it is so much more harmful than it seems. It perpetuates structural inequality, harms urban cultural diversity, and has proven links to homelessness. If America is even going to begin addressing homelessness and poverty in the country, it must first reflect on the systems in place promoting urban economic development.